Ready to dive into some seriously thought-provoking ideas about prehistory?
I'm ready. Let's do it.
We're cracking open Cyborgs versus the Earth Goddess by Dr. Moses Seenarine, and this book, well, it's not your typical history lesson.
It's definitely a different perspective.
We're talking about challenging those ingrained man-the-hunter narratives and uncovering the powerful, often overlooked roles women played in shaping early societies.
Right, because for so long, it's been all about the male perspective. Dr. Seenarine really pushes us to reconsider those assumptions.
And he starts with a really unexpected clue. Handprints.
Handprints.
Yeah, you know, those ancient handprints stenciled onto cave walls. For years, everyone just assumed they were mostly male.
Makes sense, kind of fits that man, the artist, dominant narrative we're used to, right?
Yeah, exactly. But then archaeologist Dean Snow comes along, and his research suggests something completely different. He analyzed hand stencils in caves across France and Spain.
Wow, talk about a big sample size.
Right. And he compared finger lengths because, here's the thing, the ratio between men's and women's finger lengths actually differs.
Oh, that's interesting. So you could actually tell who made the handprints just by the shape.
Exactly. And you want to know what he found?
I'm on the edge of my seat here. Tell me.
A staggering 3/4 of those handprints likely belong to women.
Wow. That changes everything, doesn't it? Suddenly, those cave paintings, those early expressions of creativity, of spirituality, it makes you wonder if they were primarily driven by women.
It really flips the script, doesn't it? And it makes you question everything we thought we knew about those prehistoric communities. If women were the primary artists, what does that tell us about their influence, about their roles in these societies?
Exactly. It's not just about art. It's about who held the power to shape cultural narratives, to lead rituals, to pass knowledge down through generations.
And that leads us to another fascinating idea Seenarine explores, the goddess culture.
I've heard a bit about, you're talking about those ancient figurines, right?
Yes, the Venus figurines. Those voluptuous figures, often with exaggerated features found all over the world. Seenarine argues that their prevalence offers major clues about the prominence of women in prehistory.
It's like these little figures are sending a message through time.
Right. And the goddess culture theory suggests that before patriarchal systems dominated, many early societies actually centered their beliefs around a female deity, a mother goddess, symbolizing fertility, creation, the cyclical nature of life itself.
It makes you think about how these figurines might have been used, how they were viewed. Imagine those objects being passed down for generations, imbued with a meaning and significance we can barely even grasp.
It's mind-blowing. And it makes sense when you think about it. Early humans were so deeply connected to nature's rhythms, relying on them for survival. And who better to embody that life-giving force than women? They literally gave birth to their communities.
It's such a powerful connection.
And speaking of the importance of women's roles, especially as they age, Seenarine also dives into the grandmother hypothesis, which is fascinating.
Oh, yes. Tell me more about that.
So, the grandmother hypothesis shines a light on the profound impact grandmothers had on human evolution. It suggests that human females evolved to live long past their reproductive years for a reason. Their presence as caregivers dramatically increased the survival rates of their grandchildren.
That makes sense. It's like having a built-in support system, freeing up mothers to focus on newborns, while grandmothers provide care, guidance, and pass down those essential skills and traditions to the older children.
Exactly. Grandmothers weren't just nurturing figures, they were the original storytellers, the wisdom keepers. Their very existence speaks volumes about the essential roles older women played in those societies.
It really challenges our modern perception of aging, doesn't it? Their contributions were vital, shaping social structures and ensuring the continuation of their lineage.
So we've got these amazing grandmothers, these artists, these vital members of these early communities.
It really makes you rethink that whole primitive caveman stereotype, doesn't it?
Totally. But then things start to shift. Humans transition from that nomadic life to settled agriculture, and things get complicated. This period, the dawn of agriculture, it's often hailed as this huge leap forward for humanity, right? But it might have come at a cost, especially for women.
It's a tricky period to analyze. There's a lot of debate, but what we can say is that control of key resources, especially food, that began to change. And with that change, you see potential shifts in power dynamics.
Yeah, if you think about it, in those hunter-gatherer societies we were talking about, women were bringing in a significant portion of the food supply through their gathering.
Absolutely.
But with agriculture, suddenly the focus shifts to ownership of land and who's controlling that land.
And that's a question that Dr. Seenarine really digs into. He suggests this shift to agriculture coincided with another huge development, the domestication of animals.
Which on the surface seems like a positive thing, right?
Sure, in many ways it was. But Seenarine argues that it wasn't just about practicality and benefits. He suggests that it reflects a fundamental shift in how humans began to view both women and nature as a whole. This idea of control over nature starts to emerge.
So instead of these animals being powerful beings in their own right, vital parts of the ecosystem, suddenly they're beings to be controlled, to be used for human benefit. It really makes you wonder, did that same shift in thinking eventually get applied to women?
That's the question Seenarine asks, and it's a compelling one, right? He wants us to consider the timeline here. We start seeing domestication of animals like goats, sheep, and that lines up pretty closely with the rise of agriculture and the establishment of settled communities.
Okay, so it's all happening in a pretty concentrated time frame.
And Seenarine's research suggests this all coincides with a change in the social structures themselves, the evidence for those dinocentric societies we talked about. It starts to become less prominent during this period.
So not a sudden overthrow of one system, but more of a gradual shift in thinking, in social structures, and in the stories and the symbols that define those societies.
It's a slow change, happening over generations. You might not even notice it if you were living through it at the time. And this is where Seenarine introduces this really thought-provoking idea, the cyborg. He uses this term to describe this kind of new mindset that he sees emerging around this time, a way of thinking that wants to separate humans from the natural world, to control and dominate rather than coexist and respect.
Now, I have to stop you there for a second. When you say cyborg, I think robots, artificial intelligence, all that.
Right, I know, it's a powerful image. But in this context, that's not exactly what he means. Think of it more metaphorically.
Okay, so help me wrap my head around this. What does he mean by cyborg when we're talking about ancient societies?
He's using cyborg as a way to help us understand how certain groups of humans began to see themselves as somehow above or outside of nature. And he argues that this cyborg mentality is really at the root of the rise of patriarchal systems, the exploitation of animals, and even, he argues, some of the environmental crises we face today.
Wow, okay, that's a lot to unpack. Does he give any concrete examples of this cyborg mentality at work back then?
He does. And a great example is the shift in how animals were viewed and utilized. Think back to those cave paintings for a second. We talk about how animals were often portrayed as powerful, divine even, often intertwined with that goddess imagery. But later, as we move into this period we're talking about, we see a pretty stark change. Animal sacrifice becomes more prominent, they're used in warfare, and overall this hierarchical view emerges, humans as masters over the natural world.
It's like all that earlier reverence for nature starts to fade.
Exactly.
That sense of interconnectedness, it's replaced with the sense of human exceptionalism, a desire to dominate for power or for resources. So we've got this shift in thinking, this move away from a more harmonious relationship with nature toward one of domination. And I imagine this shift had a profound impact on the roles women played in these societies as well.
Absolutely. It's not that women's roles became less important. They were still essential to the functioning of these new societies.
Right. Someone's got to keep everything running smoothly.
Exactly. They became the weavers, the potters, the caregivers, the ones ensuring the continuation of life and culture.
The backbone of these emerging societies.
Precisely. But as these societies became more structured, more hierarchical, we see this unfortunate pattern. Women's labor and contributions, while essential, start to be devalued. Their voices, their perspectives, often get marginalized.
It's almost like they're still holding up half the sky, but no one's really acknowledging the crucial role they're playing.
Yes, and this is where Seenarine urges us to look beyond the traditional historical narratives. You know, the ones that focus solely on kings and conquests and male dominance. He wants us to dig deeper and uncover those stories of women's resilience.
Because even within these systems, women would have found ways to resist those limitations, to hold on to their agency.
Exactly. And it's not always about these grand, sweeping gestures. Seenarine argues that a lot of this resistance was subtle, but no less powerful. Think about the passing down of traditional knowledge through generations, the stories, the songs, the rituals that preserve ancient wisdom and offer alternative perspectives.
So it's about looking for those small acts of courage, those ways in which women maintained their power and their voices, even in the face of oppression.
Precisely. And it's important to remember that these acts of resistance didn't happen in isolation. Seenarine suggests that they connect to a much broader legacy, one that stretches all the way back to those prehistoric genocentric cultures we talked about earlier.
It's like a thread of strength and wisdom, connecting women across time and cultures. It makes you wonder, what would our world look like today if we'd held on to those values of balance and interconnectedness a little more tightly?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Seenarine doesn't give us easy answers, but he challenges us to imagine a different way of being in the world, a future where those principles of balance, reciprocity, reverence for nature, that they guide our choices.
A future where both women's voices and nature's voice are heard loud and clear. That's a future I can get behind. This deep dive has been, well, it's really got me thinking. I mean, we've gone deep into these often overlooked aspects of prehistory, challenged a lot of those traditional narratives about power, and really highlighted the essential role women played in shaping our world.
It's a story that's still being written, and it's up to all of us to decide what the next chapter holds.
That's a perfect thought to end on. Thanks for diving into these fascinating ideas with me.
It was my pleasure.